Hey guys, and welcome back to another podcast. We are very lucky to be joined by a special guest again this week. So we had Jack last week, now we've got Luke Hoffman from the Muscle Mentors, the better side of the Muscle Mentors, right? No, in all seriousness, obviously we've had Callum on in the past. Two extremely knowledgeable guys, probably leading the way to, so to speak, in terms of definitely putting out fantastic knowledge and awareness in the industry, and their coaching business is really lifting off this year with the the addition of two new coaches. I heard on the Optimal Physique Development podcast that they are merely employees, apparently, Luke. So Ryan, who will almost definitely listen to this, is now hands in his head. But yeah, in reality, they're doing great things, and I wanted to get Luke on the podcast not only to sort of bring a little bit more awareness to Luke, I guess, in the sense that I don't think there's enough people following Luke and taking on board what he posts. So hopefully a few of you guys will definitely listen to this and think, yeah, cool, I'm going to definitely follow Luke. And we're going to run through through some Instagram questions that we've got through yesterday on my profile. So thanks guys for the questions again. Like always, great interaction on these topics, and a lot of you did listen to what I said in the stories, and some of you definitely didn't. The questions that are like nothing to do with Luke, we won't be answering, funnily enough, because this podcast is about Luke and no one else. So first things first, I said to Luke off air, I'd actually like him to discuss a little bit about where he's at in his bodybuilding journey and what his sort of current goals are and where he's currently heading. So Luke, just give us a bit of an idea as to sort of like where you're at, how long you've been doing this for, and what are your realistic plans when it comes to either like competing or just generically, like what are your goals at the moment within bodybuilding?
Well, thank you for the lovely introduction. That's some very kind words there, sir. And I'm honoured to be here. Like I remember when you asked me to do this, I was like, oh my god! I was like, what's for you on this podcast? It's prestigious. No, the yeah. I mean, my journey's obviously, those that know me know that myself and Callum Raystrick co-own the Muscle Mentors, co-run that. We've just taken on a couple of coaches to help us out there, in Ryan Hook and James Sutton, both very valuable additions who are obviously more than just employees. But yeah, they are like the fellow coaches that we brought in to kind of help level things up and expand things. For like James is coming on board to help from the education side because he's got some serious experience there. Ryan's coming on to initially help scale up the coaching side of things, because both Callum and I are kind of at capacity, and it's so that was logical. Yeah, I mean, my journey specifically, obviously I've been in the industry for a few years now. I think me and Cal started this end of it, like became a thing towards right at the tail end of 2017. We kind of then built that up through 2018. It kind of launched in May, and then we've been doing it then since. Had a few seminars, which all three of those were very well received. And then personal journey wise, it's kind of my passion's always been in the education side of things. So I always like want to be, building my experience and presence on that side of the industry alongside Cal and the guys. And then from a competitive bodybuilding perspective, obviously I've always had the mindset that I always know I'm going to compete at some point. It's just when I'm ready. Like I've always wanted to do it, get on stage when I know I could compete, as opposed to just get on stage for the sake of getting on stage. Because a lot of the stuff we speak about is like the health ramifications of putting putting your body through a prep. I would want to do it knowing that there's a possibility of actually coming away with something worthwhile than sacrificing health to such a degree and just being like, yeah, it was a good experience.
I got a medal.
Yeah, it would be one of those things where I'd want to kind of everything I had into it, and if that means like taking a little bit longer to get there, then that's fine, because ultimately it's all part of the same process. And yeah, I suppose that's where I'm at, and now lucky enough to be a guest on this badass podcast.
No, thank you. And I think it's important that people are aware of the sort of where you're heading, and I think a lot of some of the most successful bodybuilders actually sort of compete a little bit later on in their career, so to speak, in terms of training, because the issue is, especially when I've gotten into the sport myself, like I got in at such a young age from a competitive aspect, and whilst that's great in terms of getting stage experience, you're very right in saying that the ramifications of me competing basically like 3 times by the age of 21 they're quite big. Going through that process like time and time again is not necessarily optimal for a lot of things. So yeah, I think you're making a really good decision there. And do you think the same in terms of like sharing your physique progress? Because I noticed that you don't specifically share your physique progress that much. Do you think, like, in the perspective of I only want to share it once I'm happy or once I'm done with what work needs to be done?
Yeah.
Like, how do you view that? Because I notice a few people don't really share too much. I mean, Cal's sharing a bit more now because obviously he's heading into a prep and things are going really well in his training. But things are always going pretty well in your training. Like, you just seem to share the lifts as opposed to sharing the physique, and I think that's kind of interesting. Is there a reason why you do that?
I think it's kind of with what I post, like the stuff. People that follow me know that I'm quite big into exercise mechanics, and that's looking into that side of things. I think with my demographic being physique competitors and stuff, obviously people I coach, it makes sense to actually display my physique a bit more, and I probably should. It's more a case of I literally never take progress pictures. Like I have an objective enough eye of my own physique that I can kind of look at myself and know that I'm improving without the need to take pictures.
Yeah,
But yeah, I probably it's something to probably get better at. But it's like where I post more stuff about the lifts. There'll be times where on Monday we played around with the pendulum squat. Like it seems to be like every Monday I post a video of me dying on the pendulum squat. But like we've been kind of like slowly optimizing the setup of that particular piece of kit based on its mechanics, and on Monday we kind of finally nailed it, and I was like, I can't really post another video of pendulum squat. I have to delay that for a while. But the where I post stuff of me training, like you said, that's more because I'm always trying to link some educational content to what I post. And if I could post a picture of my my physique, but it's hard to start talking about exercise mechanics and that. It's like I mean, it's basically I don't post that. I suppose it's like that meme, I don't post that often, but when I do, and like I don't post that often, but when I do, I try and make the post quite like valuable.
Yeah,
and
I think
so
that's
I like to just churn out content for the sake of churning it out.
Yeah, I agree.
I will endeavour to start showing my physique, because I don't, it sounds arrogant, but I don't think it's that bad. I just don't like to show it. I should get better at it, especially if I'm going to go on stage at some point.
Yeah, I mean, for people like me who follow you, like I know the weight of your knowledge regardless of looking at the way that you look. And we know that cause doesn't meet correlation with the way that someone looks and what they know and how they apply it. Genetics play such a ginormous role. But unfortunately, in the world of fucking Instagram, there's going to be a lot of people that follow you that think, where's his physique? I can't believe what he does or why it's right until I see how he looks, which is ridiculous. But it's the way some people's minds work. And that's not to say that you should bow down to that whatsoever. I don't think that that's the purpose of anything. But I think that that's just a lot of way people think, and it's upsetting. But I think you'll eventually, when people do understand what you put out and they can apply it practically, and then they realize, oh, okay, this actually makes a lot of sense. Then they won't need to see the way that you look to represent the knowledge that you know. So yeah, I think that's cool. Thanks for that, Luke. So let's roll into the questions.
Hit me.
So hit me hard. Right, cool. So Brad Johnson asks, in your opinion, if you could only pick 5 supplements to use for the rest of your training career, what would they be? 5's quite a big number, to be fair. But
yeah, 5's decent.
Yeah, 5's decent. It's a stack.
Yeah, that is. I think it's it's a good question. I think creatine's in there.
Of course, yeah.
and that's like beyond training performance. So people kind of look at creatine, and we spoke about this on one of our podcasts recently, where people were like, "Oh my god, creatine does more than just fueling ATP recycling," and it's like creatine. If you look at what it does from a like biochemical standpoint, like we have obviously it's used in ATP recycling, and that's one of the things it's been studied for in terms of improving energy production on like an acute level within training. But what I like it for more than that is the health ramification study. And like people, you just need to go on examine.com and see what it's been studied for. But one of the things I really like it for is its ability to improve like methylation, but also cognitive capacity, like the energy production. Obviously, people look at that on like a level of what's happening within muscle tissue, but you've got to look at like every tissue in the body at some point at every point is using a lot of ATP, and if you can supplement to support that in every tissue, everything's generally going to run better. But one of the things that creatine's been studied for is its ability to improve, like I say, cognitive capacity. So where people are essentially supporting energy, ATP recycling and energy production within their neural tissues, their like the capacity to improve brain power is actually pretty impressive. And then when you consider like training performance in general is, and we speak about this in our seminars, training performance is predicated upon a pretty well functioning nervous system in terms of like muscular contraction is a neuromuscular driven process. Like it starts in the nervous system. If you can optimize things from the nervous system downwards, things are all going to improve, and that's where creatine's a damn good thing. But the methylation side of things, I mean, people like methylation's a complicated thing. Just understand it's one of the key things underpinning health, and there's a few amino acids that go into making creatine endogenously, and what your body will do, I've got to take some methionine and some glycine and whatever, and I've got to make creatine. Whereas if you just supplement creatine, you're basically preventing the need for the body to pull from those aminos, and you just have those guys left over to do other stuff in the body. But then you've got methylation supported, and that's basically going to help with like pretty much every bodily process from a health perspective. So creatine's in. Some people would probably expect me to say vitamin D, but we literally did a podcast, and you listened to that one. What we released on Monday, and the guy was talking about how vitamin D is, we can't replicate the power of the sun in a supplement form, and vitamin D is like, people trying to take a synthetic version of what we replicate endogenously from being exposed to the sun. And he spoke about some of the mechanisms by which vitamin D is used and stored in the body, and it kind of seems like supplemental vitamin D is actually pretty useless. And then I looked into it, and it appears as though he's right. Like there's not actually that much evidence to the vitamin D's like uses, and I've had it in client plans as like one of the basic foundational 6 supplements that I'll recommend to people, and I'm putting that out now. And it kind of comes down to where people are. I've known this for a while, that we have the capacity to store was it like I think it's up to 4 months worth of vitamin D in the liver. And like when you look at how the human body has evolved to, go through periods of the year where you can't synthesize vitamin D, that's why we don't need it in those times of year, because we have the capacity to store it. And people have kind of taken the whole thing of, oh my God, we can't synthesize vitamin D in the months of, in the winter months, and so we need to supplement with it. And it's like, actually, that's just kind of, humans being humans and kind of not looking into things and realizing that actually we've evolved to deal with that. The issue is that people don't get enough sunlight in the summer months. So if you're not going to supplement with vitamin D, which I'm not a doctor, so I can't, obviously don't take this as medical advice, consult with your GP and all that stuff, but it's probably actually not there's probably wiser things to spend your money on, but just make sure you do actually get enough sunlight in in the summer months and the times of the year where you can synthesize vitamin D, and that isn't all of the year. So people, if you want to look into that, get an app called D Minder, and it basically tells you when you're able to get vitamin D. If I pull it up now, like, it's quite shocking sometimes when you go on and it's like, oh, your next available point of vitamin, like, for, so apparently at this time of year we actually are able to get vitamin D. So in an hour's time you're able to get it. But there's a thing called the zenith angle of the sun, which is why when we're in the winter, it's especially in the UK, like, we can't, even on a sunny day, you can't synthesize vitamin D. And that app kind of tells you when. So sometimes you go on it and it says, oh, your next opportunity to vitamin D is in like May, and you're in November, and it's like, oh shit. So yeah, vitamin D wouldn't be in there. I'd say magnesium. Like, the magnesium is an interesting one, because it's used in like 350 chemical processes in the body, like energy production, enzyme creation, neurotransmitter creation, everything. And it obviously depends on the type of magnesium. So, people that are loading up on magnesium oxide, don't do that because it's poorly absorbed and you just get the shits. Use a well absorbed form. But they did an interesting kind of meta-analysis in 1964, and it was like 55 years ago, yeah. And they basically concluded then that for optimal health, human beings need about 7 to 10 milligrams per kilo body weight of magnesium, and that was due to the presence of protein, the amount of protein, calcium, vitamin D, and alcohol in the Western diet, and this was in Western societies, and those 4 factors all kind of burn through magnesium pretty readily within the human body, and you factor in stress and pollution and all that stuff as well. Tack on another 55 years, and all those 4 factors have just increased substantially. So we have more protein, more alcohol, more stress, more pollution, more vitamin D supplementation, more calcium. So it's pretty safe to say that we probably would benefit from having more magnesium in our diets. And something me and Cal see a lot, I'll have clients where, things are improving with health markers and sleep and training performance and recovery and all this stuff, but they're not quite there. And I look at their magnesium intake and it's like, oh shit, they're probably having like 3-4 milligrams per kilo body weight, and you jack that up closer to somewhere between that 7 to 10 mark, and things take a massive improvement. You can kind of see the data to confirm that. But you also look at the statistics, and literally, like, the amount of people that are magnesium deficient is pretty astounding. So I'd say magnesium's not only a very wise thing to consume, but it's also pretty damn cheap. Like, you can get a good magnesium citrate on Amazon by Solgar, magnesium glycinate by Nutri-Advanced. That's a very good one. Supplement Needs are coming out with one, and it's like one of those things that, magnesium is, it's chelated with different minerals like citrate, glycinate, or different amino acids, and they all have their own benefits. So like glycinate is obviously glycine that has quite a positive effect with calming the nervous system, so you can kind of pick and choose your magnesium well. So if someone's kind of stressed out, glycinate might be quite a good one. If it helps with sleep as well, glycine helps form GABA, which is kind of calms you down. Citrate is used in the citric acid cycle, so it helps with energy production. Also helps with producing more bicarbonate in the liver. So like people that are having issues with, if they're finding they get digestive distress when they have a lot of protein, maybe they want to be producing a bit more bicarbonate to kind of neutralize the acid as it gets through their digestive tract. So citrate's not a bad one there. Like threonate, magnesium threonate is more expensive, but that's one of the only ones that crosses the blood-brain barrier. That helps with obviously improving like energy production within the brain, which has one of the most well-studied magnesiums with respect to helping sleep. So magnesium's in. This is like the longest answer that anyone's ever given to the 5 supplements. Yeah.
Luke, scrap the fucking podcast. It's just going to be about top 5 supplements.
I think
Good. Keep going.
Zinc is a solid one as well, because if it's like this one again, people are pretty astoundingly deficient in zinc. Given we need zinc to produce insulin as well, so like within the actual like pancreatic islets, like that you actually use zinc to actually make crystals of insulin. So people that are deficient in zinc can actually run the risk of having shitty blood glucose management. You need zinc for optimal insulin receptor function. You need zinc for thyroid production, as well as like pushing T4 to T3 conversion, thyroid receptor function. You need zinc for optimal production of Leydig cells producing testosterone, so it helps with that. So it's a pretty key one. So I'd say zinc's a good shout and a pretty safe one to supplement with. Jarrow do a pretty good zinc balance. It's I've forgotten the type of zinc, but I believe it's with copper, and zinc has the capacity to deplete copper if you overdo it, so it kind of balances out quite well with that. And then mine for greens powder. Oh jeez, how did I miss the greens, mate? Yeah, I mean, we all know that AJ is a big fan of the Nutridyne fruits and greens.
Actually, a stockist now.
Actually, every time the chocolate comes back in stock, it goes out of stock the next day because AJ just fills his apartment with it. But that stuff's the bomb, and that comes down to there's a few ways you can look at that, because some people think that. And I was just a guest on Joe Jeffrey's podcast, and this came up that greens powders are awesome in terms of the world we live in today, with the level of pollution, nutrient depletion, the fact that when we buy veggies, they've traveled halfway across the world to get to us. By the time they get to us, the level of nutrients in them isn't potentially as good as it once was. So in short, topping that up with a greens powder is pretty good. The only downside to that is you have these greens powders that are quite low in quality. They're proprietary blends. You don't know actually how much is in them. They contain such a super dosed amount of phytonutrients, and that's the benefit of using them, is that you get these phytonutrients that have been lost. But there's reason to think that you would want the phytonutrients in a natural kind of quantity that you get in these plant foods without super dosing it, in conjunction with an adequate amount of fiber, which some of these greens powders don't have, so the human body might not respond to it in the same way. I've not seen any evidence for that, and there isn't really. That's kind of hypothesis, in the same way people go, magnesium, people taking 300 milligrams of magnesium, you're not going to find that in any food. And it's like, yeah, fair play, but there's no evidence to suggest that that's actually bad. It's just different. So I think greens powder would be a very good shout, especially with the lack of veg in people's diets these days. That's appalling. That's like the number one thing that I'll get when I get clients come to me and you see their food diet. Like the biggest concern I get before I even get concerned with the level of processed foods in the diet is like, oh my god, they're eating like two portions of veggies a day. Oh dear, that needs to change. So greens powder. So we've got zinc, magnesium, creatine, greens powder, and krill oil. Boom. So krill oil is one of my favorites. And it, like, people look at krill oil and they're like, oh, it's does the same thing as fish oil, and it's way more expensive. Fuck it, I'll just use fish oil. The difference between the two is krill oil is in, like, fatty acids in krill oil are in phospholipid form, whereas the ones in fish oil are in triglyceride form. Phospholipids are absorbed like twice as effectively, so it becomes cost equivalent because you need half the amount to get the same effect. Plus, krill oil has a much higher level of antioxidants in. So from addressing issues with oxidative stress and supporting inflammation and stuff, there seems to be more of a benefit for krill oil, and the research is pretty solid on krill oil. You just got to make sure you've got a good source of it. Jarrow do another good one there. But the benefits of, everyone knows the benefits of omega-3s, EPA, DHA. EPA is amazing at managing inflammation. DHA is one of the key things that has led to human brain development and due to its ability to help with like myelination and just general brain function, which again, our last guest on our podcast covered pretty well. But I think and like krill oil, because it's less often done, less often sold, it seems to be sourced in quite a nice way, whereas you get some pretty dodgy fish oils out there because it's easier to source. So like I'd say those are probably the top 5.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Great stuff. I'm sure that answered that guy's question. Awesome answer. So moving on, can caffeine cause digestion problems if consumed with a meal? And this is from Stefan. We're going to run into issues with caffeine being had at the same time as a meal.
From what I'd say is no. If you have like you get some people that have caffeine and it triggers triggers bowel movements pretty readily, and that's one of the reasons people use it. They have caffeine and then they need to go for shit. If you're finding it's causing like gastrointestinal upset, then maybe be wary of it. I don't think there's much. I've never seen it causing too much of an issue. The issue I would have with consuming caffeine in a meal is that it has been shown to actually, and coffee in particular, has been shown to inhibit the absorption of certain nutrients because it is in a sense an anti-nutrient, particularly iron. But the only population this is important with is really like vegans and vegetarians. So people that are, because non-heme iron, which is the iron found in plant foods, is so poorly absorbed in comparison to heme iron, and it's not poorly absorbed, it's just regulated in its absorption. So heme iron is the stuff, iron bound to a heme molecule that we get in animal foods, and it's not regulated in its absorption. And you look at the research and people are like, oh yeah, heme iron's amazing, and it's because it's really well absorbed. Heme iron's also incredibly pro-oxidative, and it's like so it can cause a lot of oxidative damage, and it's associated with a lot of issues with health when overconsumed. Non-heme iron isn't very well absorbed, but what they found is the human body can regulate its absorption quite well. So when you're low in iron stores, it will upregulate the ability to absorb non-heme iron. When you're adequate stores, you won't absorb it well, and that's what they've studied incorrectly, as they've looked at populations where they've got pretty adequate, iron stores in the form of ferritin, and then they've concluded that non-heme iron's terribly absorbed, when in fact it's actually just the case that the human body's like, no, I've got enough of that. The issue, back to the caffeine thing, if you're using, because non-heme iron isn't particularly well absorbed in comparison to heme iron, if you're a vegetarian and you're consuming coffee with meals, you're basically preventing the capacity, or like kind of impacting your capacity to absorb an already hard to absorb nutrient. So if you're a vegetarian, vegan, I would say keep caffeine, coffee half an hour away from meals to be safe. And it kind of comes onto the thing of, if you are a vegetarian, vegan, you've got to be pretty strategic if you want to do it well. Sure. It's not as simple as just, I don't eat meat. You've got to, if you want to be healthy, you've got to really go and figure out what foods to eat and how to eat them. But I think that's the only time I'd be wary about personally about caffeine with meals. I think unless you're having some sort of reaction to it that you don't realize you get. Some people do have reactions, and it could be down to the actual type of coffee. Like, we know there are a lot of coffees out there that are actually kept in warehouses, and the actual coffee grinds and beans get quite moldy before they're actually packaged up, and if people have a mold susceptibility, then that could be an issue. But that's the only time as far as I know, it would be an issue.
Okay, cool. I like this question from Callum Curry. He asks, if you could run any study cost-free, what would it be and why?
Oh, fuck me. That's a good question. I'd look at, there's one, me and one of my mentors, Jacques Taylor, were talking about the other day. He's a neuroscientist, and he mentioned it on the study, and we were kind of discussing how awesome it would be. But it was how there's like a massive, this is a big change of topic actually, the massive difference between concentric contractions, eccentric contractions, isometric, which technically you would term differently if you're like you'd call it an isoangular contraction, but the in terms of their ability to induce hypertrophy, there's so much debate in terms of, and it comes down to what's actually going on in the neuromuscular system during those contractions. And that, a lot of people go, oh yeah, eccentrics are the ones for hypertrophy, but you look at kind of the mechanisms for hypertrophy, and that, muscle damage, yes, that's something we want, but we also know it's way harder to recover from. And we know that to get the most muscle damage, you have to eccentrically load a muscle in its length and third range. But we also know you can get hypertrophy outside of that. And creating an energy crisis in a tissue, like a lot of metabolic demand, is a mechanism for that, and you can do that pretty well on a concentric contraction. But no one's ever looked at what happens if you exclusively do one or the other. And we were talking about, you could have like 4 groups where you have one group that does a concentric contraction only for 12 weeks, one group that does an eccentric contraction, one group that does both, one group that does nothing, one group that does an isometric, all the groups that you need to do, and then compare the results, but also control for all the things like get someone who actually understands exercise to set this stuff up well, and be able to get each group to spend the same amount of time on each contraction, because people could run that study and be like, oh yeah, there was no difference, but all groups weren't regulated in how long they were spending during each contraction. That would be an insane study, because it would be a way to almost close the book on, okay, this type of contraction is actually the best for hypertrophy, and that's what we should be biasing, because at the moment it's not. There's a lot of kind of misinterpreted research out there, people comparing concentrics and eccentrics, and they're not actually comparable in the conditions they conduct the research in. When you consider, like, if you're lifting a 20 kilo dumbbell, you've got to produce enough force. You've got to produce more than 20 kilos of force to lift the dumbbell, but then they compare that to the lowering of that, the eccentric contraction of the same 20 kilo dumbbell, whereas in the eccentric contraction of that movement, all you've got to do is, control the weight down. You're producing less than 20 kilos of force. So is it comparable to, is it fair to compare the two? Probably not. So if someone was able to do that study well, that would be phenomenal.
That would be good.
Yeah,
that would be good. Cool. So Connor asks, what does heart rate variability mean, and how does it affect us?
So heart rate variability is basically the amount of, like, the variability between your heartbeats. So in terms of, it's basically the time duration between heartbeats. And people look at, there was a study that came out recently that kind of poo-pooed it, but it was an awful study. It was a terrible study. Me and Cal got tagged in it, and I just destroyed it. But the is basically signifies the kind of balance of your autonomic nervous system. So that the shorter the time between your heartbeats, the more suggestive it is that you are in a sympathetic dominant state, which is kind of the fight or flight branch of the autonomic nervous system. The further spaced apart the beats are and more kind of irregular, is more of a, more suggestive of kind of parasympathetic, rest and digest, feed and breathe side of the nervous system, which is kind of, if you're looking to maximize things like digestion, sleep, recovery, you want to be able to, like me and Cal Town quite a lot, flip the switch. You want to be able to move between those two branches of the autonomic nervous system when needed. So when we're training and we're trying to perform, we want to be able to get into that sympathetic state well. When we're outside of training, we want to be able to get into that calm state pretty well, and that's what we'll use it for. So in terms of like tracking how, the load we're placing on someone with our programming and nutrition and stuff, like what's it suggesting of their nervous system. And like some people take that, and this is what the study suggested, like when you take that in a training scenario and try and base recovery off that, it doesn't really make a difference. And I think that's fair, because it was never they were basically comparing HRV, or like studying HRV as a tool for improving hypertrophy, because you'll essentially be more well rested going into each session. So logically, you should accrue greater levels of muscle and strength. Doesn't work like that. What it is a good gauge for is like how stressed out someone is. So what, like, I'll use it, but I won't. If someone gets a reading that they wake up one day and they're like, oh, I'm quite quite sympathetic today, and like my app says I should take it easy. The first question I always ask them is, how do you actually feel? And 9 times out of 10 they're like, I feel pretty good. And it's like, okay, crack on, mate. Like but if someone's wakes up and they're like, actually I feel pretty shit, I'd be like, okay, maybe you should take a rest day. But all that's going to inform is maybe I need to look at where I place volume, not, oh, this guy's got to have another couple of rest days before he goes back in. It's going to be a case of, if that thing becomes a pattern, then it would be like, okay, maybe that lower session that keeps leading to that HRV reading is a little too much for him at this point in time. And it just kind of informs how as a coach I'm structuring their plan, as opposed to how they ought to live their lives, which is the way that people get it wrong. They kind of, you want to use it as a tool to figure out the allostatic load that's placed on your body, as opposed to using, getting a reading off an app and be like, oh my God, I can't train today. This app is telling me I can't train, when you actually probably feel pretty good.
So I guess you're looking more at trends of data that's being collected, as opposed to a singular event of fuck, it's not right. Yeah, we need to look at trends.
It's more, and do you track it with your clients?
I do with some, not with all.
Yeah, and what I've found is it's more of a, I almost tell clients to disregard it now. I just say, just put it on the check-in sheet. Don't worry about it. That's for me to worry about, not you.
It's like scale. It's like any data, isn't it? Like the stress of the load of the data, you want to kind of take that away from the client, and you want to be the analytical one that says this is right or this is wrong.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah.
And what would you, obviously you used an Aura ring, but for anyone that doesn't currently track our HRV and doesn't want to invest in an Aura ring, what would your initial sort of HRV starter pack be in terms of taking the data?
Who doesn't want to track it?
No, they do want to track it. Like, so what would you use if you're not using an Aura ring?
So the best app for it at the moment seems to be one called HRV 4 Training, and that's spelt HRV the number 4 Training. That's we were using Elite HRV, but and that's a very common one. The HRV 4 Training one you have to pay for, but the guy who's designed it has used a far more accurate algorithm.
Okay.
And the Elite HRV one is a little bit annoying that's the one that tends to confuse people with the readiness score it gives you every morning. Because if there's a big change, regardless of what the reading's like, so you could have a really good reading, but because there's been a big change, it tends to tell you to just take it easy, and it's like, what? Like, it's just like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Whereas the HRV 4 Training one seems to match up more with actually how people are feeling. But it's sort of like it costs a bit more, but it's just more accurate. And then you'd use that with a Polar H10 heart rate monitor. Seems to be the most accurate way of doing that. In terms of like heart rate monitors, the Polar series tend to be like, they've done studies where they've compared how accurate these kind of generic heart rate monitors are compared to lab heart rate monitors, and the Polar series kind of come out on top every time. So I'd use those.
Nice. Cool. So let's ask a nutrition-based question, as we haven't really had one of those yet. So we got asked your opinion on, this is an approach sort of more brought to the front by a guy called Broderick Chavez. Do you know who Broderick Chavez is? He's been on a few podcasts here and there. So he's
on yours?
No, he hasn't been on mine. His approach to gaining phases from a nutrition perspective is that of like higher carb massing. So his thought process behind that is that we keep fats as low as possible and ramp up carbohydrates as high as possible, because fats beyond a certain degree don't offer or yield any further benefit above that sort of 0.8 grams per kilogram threshold. So that's his thought process on that, as far as I'm aware. And anyone can correct me on why that thought process may be wrong. But what's your thoughts on that? You know, prioritizing purely carbohydrates in a gaining phase for tissue accrual, and obviously keeping fats at maybe even close to what they would be in a diet phase. What's your opinions?
Good question. I'm always skeptical when someone comes out with a generic statement regarding nutrition, training, supplementation. Like, everyone should do this. I'm like, you realize we're dealing with human beings and we're all different, right? I think it's hard to generalize sort of stuff like that. So I think I'm always skeptical, but like there's I think if you are trying to, it's difficult. Like, I think the thing about like massing phases is it kind of, regardless of where you place stuff, I think down to the fats, you could put fats wherever you want. I think what comes down to with fats is you need to have the right ratios of, like, you actually need to pay attention to what fats you're eating. Like, people kind of just go, yeah, I've got my fats at 80 grams and I get it all from peanut butter and dark chocolate. It's like, okay, you realize there are other fats out there. But it's like there's certain health benefits associated with different fat sources, and you know, people look at saturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated. People tend to graduate. What's the word I'm looking for? Graduate. They tend to be drawn to, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, saturated fats for some reason. There's a lot of, there's a story highlight on my profile about this, like people gravitate, that's the one, gravitate towards these because there's a lot of like hearsay at the moment that, oh yeah, saturated fats are great, everyone should be eating saturated fats, but there's no real backing to that other than people have started putting butter in coffee and feeling pretty good, and there's a few saturated fats out there that do carry health benefits. But you know, that you look at fats and as a broad term, like saturated fats, well, there's like 26 different types of saturated fat and they all have different effects. Monounsaturated fats, there's tons of different ones of them. Polyunsaturated, the health benefits of fats tend to be associated more with a very small amount of saturated fats and more of the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated. So I think if you're going to get into the fat debate, you need to pay attention between those two. And if someone was like predominantly having saturated fats, I would say I wouldn't push your fat intake too high because there's not enough health benefits associated with them. If someone had a pretty good range of fats in terms of like monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, like olive oil, avocado, macadamia nuts, walnut oils for, walnuts and walnut oils for polyunsaturated, I think there's room to play around with increasing fat intake because you're going to get a different effect from having them in. The carb side of things, and it's like the thing of like a massing phase in general, this is where I would always go, I wouldn't go off like I'm going to push food as high as I can. I'd be like, I'm going to put food in a good place to ensure that things start moving in the right direction, and I'm going to monitor health markers and make sure that nothing goes too crazy, because hypertrophy, massing, putting on tissue is a signaling dependent process, and it's dependent on your body being able to respond to the signals we're creating in the gym from an acute perspective, and if we let information get away from us, then it's going to impede that process. And I think that always happens when people kind of unnecessarily push food high, and I don't think people need to push food as high as they think. And I think preferentially I would probably push carbs a little bit higher. I think people pushing protein higher, I spoke about this on the podcast, Joe Jeffrey's podcast the other day, protein being pushed is just pointless, because even if you're an assisted athlete, the benefit you get in being able to like use more dietary protein for muscle protein synthesis, fair play. You don't get any additional benefit to being able to break that down in your digestive system, and that's what's ultimately going to shoot you in the foot.
Sure.
But the carbs, I think, as a growth stimulus, I think there is more of a benefit to having them higher, provided someone can handle it. Provided your ability to use glucose well is more quote unquote optimal, and I think provided you're able to actually, your energy and activity levels and intensity in the gym actually warrants a pretty high amount of carbohydrates. So
Would you in that case, because I think I'm not sure this is like part across in his theory, but would you be in the mind to suggest a higher fat approach to a rest day caloric intake with the training days being such low in fats? So if we were going around that 0.8 grams per kilogram mark on a training day, would you suggest a high intake on a rest day for, I don't know, increased dietary diversity and things like that, and making sure that you're getting in, a diversity of essential fatty acids? Because how much are you going to really be able to get in of, wide diverse sources on a training day where your carbs are ramped up and your fats are minimal? You're going to run into a lot of trace fats and no real sources of actual direct fats. That's the issue that I actually see with the approach, because I don't think the suggestion is there for someone to have higher fats on a rest day. I believe that they just keep the caloric intake the same on a training day and a rest day.
Oh, really? So I think all that, it's a thing, because like if someone's ultimately, I hate to say it, I get bored. I'm gonna drop the bomb on this in our seminar. I've got the funniest start to our seminar, which is going to involve energy balance, and I'm going to say it once and I'm not going to say it again. It does come down to energy balance, in the sense of, like, when if someone keeps food the same every day, fair play. It just means, like, you're not going to be able to push food a lot, as high as you probably could on a training day. And if you were to push food high on a training day, you would have to decrease it a bit on a non-training day. Swings and roundabouts. I think what I like to, I play around with it. Some people, I do have food the same on training and non-training days, and it works really well based on their lifestyle. Some people, I do like to push fats a little bit higher and pull carbs down and pull calories down, because their activity levels don't demand much, very high caloric intake on their rest days. But also, I think there's a benefit to actually promoting metabolic flexibility, like people having bonus amounts of carbs on their rest days. It pays to get people's bodies to actually start exploring other ways to produce energy. I think putting fats a little bit higher, provided their ability to deal with fats from a digestive perspective is good, which to some people, if they've come from a place of very low fats, and people will notice this, and then they go, oh, I've been having 30 grams of fats a day, and I've just seen so-and-so has 120 grams, fuck it, I'm going to go on 120 grams. Like, they may have experienced, like, down regulation in their bile production, and that's, because of having such low fats, and that's ultimately going to mean they can't process as much fat as that person who's on 120 grams a day. So if you are going to start working your fats up, do it slowly. And if you start getting gastrointestinal distress, then consult with someone who actually knows what they're doing on that. But I think, yes, I do like the idea of putting fats a little bit higher, and I don't like the idea of putting fats low. Like, if someone comes to me and their fats are like sub, and this is bias, so this isn't, everyone has personal bias, and I'm well aware that I have mine. I don't like putting fats below 60 grams unless I have to. And I think when people are, like, going around on, like, 30 grams of fat, and that 30 grams of fat is coming from trace sources of fat, from, like, animal protein and stuff like that, it's probably not the wisest thing to do for a health perspective. And when you consider, like, health and performance ultimately go hand in hand, I would be more. People need to definitely pay more attention to their fat intake.
Yeah, and I think it's common amongst most bodybuilding diets to have a very low fat approach, because common bodybuilding diets you don't really look at fats being included in a bodybuilding meal plan. You might be lucky if you get something like eggs, if people are using eggs in and the amount of people, like, following very sort of standard old school bodybuilding diets out there, mate, is still an absolute abundance. And the amount of people that I've had come to me that are on, when you work it out what they're actually consuming, the fats are extremely low. Just because that's what they've been told to do, or what they think is right. But yeah, I think that's interesting. I just wanted to cover that one and get your thoughts.
I just add a little bit more. Like, people look at bodybuilding and hypertrophy and stuff through a very narrow, like, telescope, you could say. Like, they look at it on microscope, and they're like, oh yeah, if it's not anabolic, I'm not considering it. And it's like, fats. You look at it, people aren't going to study fats and be like, oh yeah, this, olive oil is fucking anabolic, mate. It's not about whether something's directly anabolic. It's about, you know, the downstream effect of including it in terms of, does it help you manage inflammation and improve health, which is in turn going to indirectly increase your ability to run anabolic processes. Yeah. And then you look at things like fish oil, and, you know, we spoke about DHA earlier. You know, that's one of the reasons we've developed such amazing brain capacities as human beings, because we ate so much seafood. If someone suddenly spends their whole life eating trace amounts of fat from shitty protein sources that have been farmed, and, you know, and all this stuff, and it's like, okay, you know, you can improve everything by, you know, like we spoke about earlier, that, you know, muscular activity is, you know, predicated by the nervous system, or predicated on optimal nervous system activity. So, you know, fats supporting things from that perspective as well. But like cell membranes and everything like that, like was one of the things, like you get people that don't consume enough omega-3s, EPA, and they get very rigid cell walls, and then their ability to actually get things in and out of their cells, and, you know, cell signaling is impacted so massively, and then they wonder why they're running into health issues and stuff like that. And so it's, you know, people do need to pay more attention to that. And you know, you even look at research, they found that omega-3s, you know, fish oil can actually activate mTOR. So I suppose it is anabolic. So people want to take my word for it, then get on the fish oil. Just don't start going crazy on it, because you can take too much in and actually go the other way and make your cells too like the cell wall's not rigid enough. So people that are like, oh my god, I'm gonna start having 50 grams of fish oil a day, which has been done, you know, you can run into some serious issues in terms of leaky cells and also an inability to clot. So if you then cut yourself in a car accident, you're gonna die.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so be careful with that shit. Yeah. But it shows like how, you know, the effect, how profound the effect fats can have on our physiologies. Huge, yeah. Get them in, people.
So we'll cover one more question. So basically the question is regarding night shifts, and it's actually more so regarding training, but I think it would be good to get your thoughts on a little bit of nutrition and training for night shifts, because I know that, you know, you're a huge fan of getting fantastic sleep and sleep health, sleep hygiene, and night shifts tend to just completely ruin that. So in terms of just looking at night shifts in general, especially someone that maybe doesn't consistently work night shifts, maybe transitions between day and night, what would your generic advice would be for nutrition and training surrounding night shift workers?
So first things first, I'm not a doctor, so everything I'm about to say, take it with a pinch of salt, and consult someone who's actually qualified to speak about this before you implement it. But like the thing about night shift, people got to understand, it has been now classified as a group 2A carcinogen. So it is like, which is a probable carcinogen. So it's not been confirmed that it's carcinogenic, which is like cancer causing, but it is very likely that all the research is correlating, like it's suggesting that correlation is evident. But obviously they haven't established causation yet. But what we know is like circadian biology, and like the disruption we get to our circadian biology, our circadian rhythms from night shift work is pretty astounding, and it's that disruption that seems to cause most of the health issues associated with it. And you look at the research of it, like, you know, women that, you know, do a lot of night shift work incur a massive risk of breast cancer development, and like the rates of breast cancer in those populations are pretty damn high. But it comes down to the level of inflammation that we get hit with. Like Matthew Walker's spoken about this on podcasts, where, you know, they've done like studies where they've given people good sleep, and then they've disrupted their sleep for one night, and I think they gave them like 4 hours sleep or something, and they found a 70% reduction in their natural killer cell production, and the natural killer cells are the guys that fight cancer. So that's from one night, and then you add that, you know, give that to someone for 30, 40 years of their life, and then you wonder why they turn around with cancer at some point. So, because you've been living the last 30, 40 years with a 70% lowered ability to fight cancer. it's what you got to understand though with night shift is you can't beat it. If you're going to do it, you're going to be fucked. You've got to learn how to like minimize the effect and support the areas of your body that are going to be taking a hit. And there's a strat. I think Dr. Dean, who is one of the guys who works with us at Supplement Needs, a lot of people follow him. He's posted some good stuff on night shifts because he does it personally. What I've read, I've got clients with it. I have like my own strategy that I use. It seems to work pretty well, but it basically involves being able to, and it's kind of pretty much entirely supplemental. The only nutritional side of things is you wouldn't want to eat while you're on the night shift, so fasting is going to be a very, very key thing, because and that goes with like people doing overnight flights. People go on a flight overnight, or even just a long haul flight that spans a point in the night, point of the day where they'd normally be asleep. Eating and even drinking quite a lot during that time, you're giving your body a stimulus that's not used to receiving. People go on a plane, they're like, oh yeah, I didn't fast, but I drank 3 liters of water. It's like, I don't think you'd normally drink 3 liters of water while you're asleep, mate. So it's like implementing those things. So fasting's a good shout because you're basically going to ensure that and this is where like circadian rhythms they're present in like every tissue in the body. So there's like the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is in our hypothalamus, in our brain, and that's like the master clock, and then all the other clocks in the tissues in our body respond to that. They're kind of trained by that. But if we put food into our digestive system, there are circadian clocks, like peripheral clocks in our digestive tract, in our liver, that will then get kind of reset and throw the whole system off. So people kind of go, oh yeah, I'll eat in the middle of the night when I'm doing a night shift, and they've just kind of retrained some of those clocks, and it kind of causes an imbalance in that system. So eating, avoiding loads of drink, probably avoid that. Blue light blocking glasses, get them in, because obviously avoid minimizing the effect of that artificial light, which is going to disrupt that suprachiasmatic nucleus, which responds to light coming in the eye. So putting on like blockers like that is going to be a good shout, just to minimize the effect that that's going to have. Mm-hmm. But then from a supplemental standpoint, which is when it becomes more of an expensive thing, you basically need to find a way where you can jump in and manually reset the system, and that comes with melatonin. So people like melatonin being the hormone or neurotransmitter hormone that we produce endogenously in dark towards the later periods of the day, that entrains our suprachiasmatic nucleus and kind of is one of the key drivers for sleep. If we can find a way to kind of get that guy to come back on when it's been disrupted, which is what happens if people go through a night shift and then they kind of lose that natural melatonin production. If you get some supplemental melatonin, which you can't actually get in the UK unless you get it prescribed, or you have contacts in America, or there is one website I know of that I can get it on, which is legit, but it's because it's all from America. So my clients are lucky because I can just hook them up with that. I have to give that to AJ so he can sort it out as well. Yeah, but that basically will give you the opportunity to kind of jump in and manually reset it. So following the night shift that evening, some people take melatonin during the night shift. I know a few clients of Ryan's, my colleague Ryan, and I've got a client that can't do that because melatonin makes you drowsy, and they've got to operate motor vehicles while they're on their night shift. And so taking melatonin while doing that, pretty stupid. But the following night, you take a couple of milligrams of melatonin to kind of reset things and get that artificially reset the clock. Yeah. And then, but also during the night shift itself, because like we spoke about, that effect, that hit that you're going to take for your ability to respond to oxidative stress and the amount of oxidative stress you're going to incur, being able to support that is a pretty good idea. What I found is using like some form of antioxidant support, but like liposomal glutathione, or NAC, which is N-acetylcysteine, which converts to glutathione, which is like the third most potent antioxidant in the body. Like it's the only one we can supplement with. There's two above it, like one called superoxide dismutase and one called catalase, but you can't supplement with them because they're not stable enough. But zinc actually helps with catalase, which is one of the reasons why you'd have that. And then selenium, I think, is used in the other one. So selenium's not a bad one. But the glutathione, liposomal glutathione, I'm going to plug my supplement sponsor. Supplement Needs, do a damn good one. But there are some other ones out there, but it is a very good supplement in terms of being able to support your body and give it more of an ability to fend off that oxidative stress, because basically, we create a lot of oxidative stress in our mitochondria and stuff like that, which is damaging to our bodily tissues. And the antioxidants like glutathione, essentially, they basically work by we produce a lot of free radicals or reactive oxygen species, which are these kind of like nutty molecules that come out of our mitochondria and do damage. And the antioxidants essentially work as like they sacrifice themselves for us. So they will basically take these, bind to these molecules and kind of take them out of commission before they can damage us. So glutathione's a good shout for that. And there's some form of curcumin to actually manage inflammation as well, because you're very likely to incur quite high levels of inflammation from night shift work. So putting in curcumin has been well studied for that. And again, supplement needs to do a good liposomal curcumin. I spoke to AJ about this because curcumin has quite a good capacity to help with reducing inflammation in like more ways than just that. So in terms of like the injury AJ's had, like there's liposomal curcumin, phytosome curcumin, BCM 95, which is another form of curcumin, and biocurcumin, and like they kind of from liposomal down they get less and less effective. So if you have liposomal you need less, if you have phytosome you need a little bit more but not quite as much. If you have the BCM 95 you need a bit more, and if you have the biocurcumin you need a decent amount to get the same effect. But those three in that order. So you'd probably have the glutathione and the curcumin during the night shift and preceding it, and then the following night you'd use the melatonin to basically restart the system and get everything back on track.
Nice.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's not bad.
And in terms of like training, obviously, would you recommend that if they were switching between day and night shifts, where would you try and situate the majority of their sessions? Would it be on the days that they're working day shifts and train in the evenings so they can not switch back into a normal sleep cycle throughout the night, or would it be after the night shifts, or would it just be a case of doing all the things that you've mentioned and then managing to fit in your training in around that?
I just realised I missed out a few things, but I can say them now.
Mm-hmm.
The training the day after a night shift, I'd say don't even bother. In the same way, training a day after people have just overconsumed on alcohol, don't even bother. People are like, oh yeah, I'm going to the gym, I've just had a really heavy night out. You've just like created so much inflammation, actually compromised hypertrophic signaling to such an acute degree. There's no point in like going to the gym because you're not actually going to get anything out of it, and you're just going to make it harder for your body to recover. Same thing following a night shift. The inflammation and oxidative stress you've just incurred from the sleep deprivation, don't even bother. Literally, and this is where I left out the main fucking bit, which is lifestyle strategies. Get as much daylight as you can the following day, following a night shift. So get out in the sun, get barefoot on some grass if you can. So do some grounding. If people think grounding is hippie, just Google, go on PubMed and type in grounding and inflammation. The amount of research out there supporting grounding's effect at reducing inflammation is insane. It comes back to that antioxidant thing, like when we're in contact with the earth without electronics on us, so don't do it with your phones on you. You soak up a lot of free electrons from the earth, and that's what antioxidants provide. So antioxidants like ALA and some of those antioxidant, glutathione itself as well, they provide electrons for those reactive oxygen species so that the electrons basically sacrifice themselves on those antioxidants, on those oxidative reactive oxygen species. So soaking up those from the earth is a free way of improving inflammation, but being in contact with the earth from its like native electromagnetic fields is very good for resetting human physiology and like circadian rhythms, but getting light in as well. People want an idea on how powerful light is. Listen to the last episode on our Muscle Mentors podcast because it's fucking game changer. But like just doing those two things is massive. And that's how I'd spend the following day doing a night shift. But leading into a night shift, if you want to train. Just know that you're probably not going to be set up well to recover from that session, so I wouldn't go crazy with it. I would, if you want to train, I'd almost approach that session as you would a deload, like kind of go in and just like do something productive, but don't try and absolutely destroy your nervous system and immune system. Because the immune system is what we hit when we try and elicit a hypertrophic response. Our immune system is one of the main things that's responding there, and if we're going into the gym doing some massive leg session and then going and doing a night shift where our immune system is going to be then compromised even further, your ability to recover from that isn't great. So if you were really on it, you'd probably take those 2 days off. And so like the day, but if you wanted to do something, just don't go crazy and then have the following day off and get loads of daylight.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. That's pretty much covered that question fantastically. So awesome, Luke. I think we'll leave it there for questions. We said we'll wrap it at about an hour. So thank you very much for some incredible answers as always. You definitely didn't disappoint on any of those, and I'm sure people are led away with some fantastic information to take home. So guys, as always, thank you very much for listening to us chat away for an hour. If you've got any further questions or clarification on any of the topics that Luke covered, just shoot them in the comment box, and I'll let Luke know if there's anything that he needs to get back to in there. But I'm sure... What's that?
Just slide in my DMs because I always answer.
Exactly.
People.
Yeah, there's another way to get to Luke. If you ask him about exercise mechanics in his DMs, he'll probably do an entire hour of topic for you.
Just get excited.
But yeah, guys, make sure you follow Luke as well. I'll leave his Instagram as the first link in the bio, so give him a follow and watch what he does and learn from it. And also, what are your dates? I know that the tickets haven't been released yet, but just remind people of the dates for the seminar that you're running at Ultimate with the rest of the Muscle Mentors team.
Yeah, so we're doing on April 27th and 28th, we're doing a theory weekend, which is actually going to be covering similar stuff to what we talked about. Like I'm going to be going through like the gastrointestinal system, sleep, circadian biology. James is going to be doing a bit on mindset and psychology. Cal's going to be going through female physiology and kind of training and nutritional implications for that. We're going to do some kind of like nutritional strategies for maximizing hypertrophy. There'll be some stuff on supplementation. It's going to be pretty deep. And then we're doing a practical weekend on the 7th and 8th of June, I believe. Sure. 8th and 9th of June, which is going to be going through exercise mechanics in a pretty deep way, and like kind of giving people the basics of strength profiles, resistance profiles, like understanding how to set up and cue exercises properly and what sort of things they'll have to take into account when they're trying to fit individuals or fit exercises to an individual as opposed to fitting individuals into an exercise, and basically personalizing the approach, but also just making, applying that to the whole hypertrophy side of things and like how people want to structure training programs with regards to actually getting the most out of it whilst remaining injury free and getting the most bang for their buck, basically.
Cool.
It should be juicy.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, keep an eye out for when tickets get released for that. And other than that, I think that's it. So yeah, guys, thanks for listening, and we'll chat in the next one.
Cheers for having me, man.
See you in a bit. Cool. Thank you, dude.
Mate, that was awesome.
That was sweet. I didn't have to do any work for that one. I just sat here and listened.